You're listening to the Visionary Lifestyle Podcast, the show that's dedicated to raising consciousness and empowering you to activate your highest potential. I'm your host, Magda Freedom Rod. Today's guest is Maryam Henein. Maryam is an investigative journalist, activist, filmmaker, yogini, and entrepreneur. She's best known for directing the documentary Vanishing of the Bees, narrated by Ellen Page. Following a near-fatal pedestrian versus car crash in 2002 that dragged her for 49 feet, she researched issues of health and nutrition to help her in her recovery, and through that, she became aware of colony collapse disorder, which led her to make her film. Since the release of Vanishing of the Bees, she's become an outspoken advocate of bees and bee colonies, non-GMO foods, and the release of pesticides into the environment. Her latest venture is honeycolony.com, a member-supported online magazine and marketplace that hosts a number of optimized health and investigative writers. I know her as a tireless voice for health, the environment, and as someone who encourages people to be their own best health advocate. In this interview, we discuss why bees are sacred, the most ethical way to source your bee products, pesticides on planes, autoimmune disorders, and lots more. Now let's tune into the show to get all the buzz. Welcome, Maryam Henein.
Thank you for having me.
In the flesh, here you are. So happy to have you here with us today in the studio. So many questions for you. I already introduced you, so we don't need to go too deep into who you are. People are already somewhat versed, but we're going to dive a little bit deeper today. One of the questions I'm really excited to ask you is, as an investigative journalist, which I think is such a cool title, it brings up lots of images in my mind. What's your specialty? What do you really like to focus on? Do you have a specific thing that you focus on with your work?
Do you mean beats? Areas of expertise?
Yes. What's your beat?
Well, my beat, I think, has become drawing the parallels between honeybees and human beings, and basically bringing forth information on toxins. I'm very passionate about clean living and exposing these toxins and more so educating people to draw the connections, because I really believe that we are the bees.
What do you mean by that?
If we look at honeybees now, so 2017, we're looking at a 10-year retrospect since George and I started researching colony collapse disorder. So it's been a decade. And we know very much that the bees are dying sublethally because of these neonicotinoids. So it's not A plus B equals C. These pesticides are very insidious. And I think just what's happening with them is happening to us, that if we continue on the same trajectory that we're now on, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, if you tell me that you're a healthy person, you will be in the minority if we continue the path we're going
on the current trajectory. Okay, well that leads me to my next question, because I have seen your film and I found it to be very informative, and I think you did a great job on it. And I wanted to confirm, which I think you just did with your last answer, that it's the systemic pesticides that are responsible for colony collapse disorder by your research. Is that correct?
Yes, according to a research which at the time was cutting edge in that no one else was saying that, but now there's been hundreds of studies out of Harvard, Yale, tons from Europe. There's an entire task force that's been appointed to be in charge of looking at how neonicotinoids are affecting us, and the problem is still very much amongst us, where bees are still dying at alarming rates every year, in part because bees can populate so quickly that one of the points that they make is that bees are more than ever, they're increasing in numbers. That's not so. It's just that you could take a hive and split it into 2, 3, 4, and the bees are constantly repopulating. But they are still very much dying. And I think that we are also being subject to sublethal poisons that are not right away causing a disease, but it's like we're living in a perfect storm. Not only is the air polluted, the earth, the soil, the water, now neonicotinoids alone, let alone the other bevy of chemicals, are now killing sea urchins, crabs, killing our coral reef. So now that it's in the water,
in the ocean,
yeah, and it stays in the soil up to 18 years, and a lot of times the metabolites are more dangerous than the parent compounds.
So would that be, do you think, because it's in the soil and then the waterways are washing it into the ocean, so it's the same problem, it's just another symptom of the same problem, that pesticides are in the soil and getting washed into the ocean, so now we're just polluting more of the planet?
It's
right?
a really problem of as you know, monocultures and our modern agricultural landscape. And so it seems that more and more I'm covering these types of stories that have to do with toxins. And it's not like I want to be negative because I'm offering solutions. But for instance, I just did a piece on Truth Out, which is a progressive publication looking at modern agriculture in Greece and really educating people on, we have this romantic notion of what Greece is because it has, you know, links to agriculture that link back. I mean, it's part of their legacy and heritage. And now we have the same thing where the European Union is incentivizing farmers with subsidies for shitty crops. Can I swear?
Yeah, you can. This is a show for people who give a shit, so go ahead.
Okay. Great.
Okay, so that was part of my next question is, you know, what is the status of the bees today? So colony collapse disorder is still happening. What can you tell us about the birds? I wanted to talk about the birds and the bees with you, and I might even make that the title of this episode.
Okay.
So the birds and the bees.
Well,
tell me more.
These systemic pesticides are slowly killing the birds and the bees and the bats and the monarchs, so, and the other native bees, and so birds. I don't have specific stats to share, but we know that the environment as a whole, a lot of the species are going. I mean, I'm laughing. It's not funny.
Well, do we look at the birds in this instance as like the canary in the coal mine, if you will? That, you know, can we point to the birds and say, well, the birds are dying. This is the same reason that the bees are dying. Does that make sense to you?
But when you're speaking about systemic pesticides in particular, then I think there are other things that are impacting the birds. They are not typically described as an environmental indicator species, such as the bees are, because their immune system, because they're so fragile. And that's what I was saying, that when I say we are the bees, I think especially, let's say, people that are suffering with autoimmune conditions, which is running rampant. We're looking at 50 to 80 million in America alone.
Yeah.
That, you know, and many of them have multiple chemical sensitivity known as MCS, that, you know, I can walk in, I have MCS, I can walk into a place and be like, oh yeah, by the way, you have mold, or by the way, you have a gas leak, and they're like, what? Yeah, look into it, you know, so I can detect things.
Because you've become so sensitive.
Because I've been exposed to chemicals now, ironically, like the bees after making the film. Was in the Dominican Republic, ironically, for an environmental film festival, and we were staying far away from, you know, an hour away on the beach a week before the festival. They were using what I thought was a leaf blower, but turned out to be, this guy was in between two buildings. I went to tell him to shut the F up, because of the noise, and I wanted to enjoy the beach, and he turned around and he had a pack on his back and he was wearing a gas mask, and it was windy, and I inhaled a whole bunch of chemicals. And then about 2-3 months later, I couldn't even go up the stairs. I was in so much pain. And as someone who's already been like knocked down by a Ford Explorer and had my share of physical challenges, to now be like, I can't even bike, I can't. And I thought something was wrong with my thyroid. And of course, Western medicine did not acknowledge the poisons. And I'm going to segue just to say, well, eventually I was diagnosed with, hey, you have lupus, you have fibromyalgia, here's some steroids, here's some Cymbalta, can't do anything for you, see you. But that Western medicine is maybe just now acknowledging the effects of the environment and the toxins that play into it. So if you have an ailment, you have to very much look into exposures, whether you're exposed to molds or whether you're exposed to endocrine disruptors in mainstream products.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so much to contend with, because how many thousands of chemicals that have not gotten proper EPA has not been approved by the EPA.
Mm-hmm. Well, that brings up another question about how can people protect themselves. If we're talking, we want to acknowledge the problems, but we also want to be bringing solutions.
Absolutely.
And in regards to health, I preach a lot that prevention is the cure, and there's so much that we can prevent, so much illness that we can prevent with our food and lifestyle choices. But when it comes to these sort of chemical exposures that you're referring to, do you have any thoughts or tips about how people can protect themselves from these things?
Yes, preventative is the key. And now that I have a health and wellness site, for instance, we sell CBD oil, we sell silver. I have tons of people every day. My daughter has this condition. Can you help? And they don't take into consideration the chemical body burden. So what you can do is, ransack your house and throw away all these skincare products. Skin is the largest organ.
Right.
Excuse me. Scrutinize, just because it says natural or...
Right. Natural is meaningless.
Yeah,
there's no oversight
so many
for
people are like,
word.
but
Right.
it says natural. Who cares?
Right. People assume that the FDA is, protecting them in regards to personal care products, and that's just not the case. That is a big topic of conversation on this show. So I'm glad you brought that up. So going through and removing anything in your house that might have, toxic chemicals in it, and I've given people the resources of the Skin Deep database to be able to help determine how safe their products are, also cleaning products. Pointing people to the environmental working group for tips on how to make their own cleaning products, and throwing away any of this kind of over-the-counter store-bought stuff that's just pure chemicals.
Absolutely.
Right? There was another thing I know that I remember you talking about, the pesticides that are being sprayed on planes now. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So it turns out that certain flights, increasingly so because of the Zika BS epidemic that's going around, that you're on the plane and, oh, look at the stewardess, she's so kind, she wants to freshen our entire cabin with this canister, but it's really pyrethroids, and they're spraying against the possible insect that might make its way into the country. So certain places like Australia, it's just like a slam dunk. You'll get
and they don't even notify you. They're just acting like they're spraying some room freshener, and they're
because
actually spraying.
They're
pesticides?
programmed themselves. They think they've been told it's safe, and they don't do due diligence, because I think more and more now we're waking up to the fact that, hey, these governments don't have our back. They're full of crap. They're crazy.
Right. So you've written a piece about this that people can look for and get some more information about that. For people who are traveling a lot, it might be a big concern that people want to learn more.
Yes, I've written about it a couple of different times, angles. I've also facilitated, edited other pieces that I've found. For instance, an American Airlines former employer that now has early onset Parkinson's because he was in charge of cleaning the planes, And so the cabins, if they're not going to spray you while you're on the plane in the friendly skies, then they will treat the cabin, treat the so you're sitting in the chair has been treated.
Just like the toxic mattress with the flame retardants
yes.
that you're sleeping on, like that
yes.
kind of idea.
And so a lot of it's now been said that you think you might have jet lag, but you just got poisoned.
Right. Oh, okay. All right. So people can research about that, about the pesticides being sprayed on planes. That's an important subject for people to do their own research on, I'd say. I wanted to go back to the bees for a minute. I love the notion of the queen bee, and I know that you've talked about it in your film and elsewhere about how the bee is like a goddess, and I'd like to get your insight on what that means to you and what that history is.
So the bees are ancient messengers, and they represent the sacred feminine, and that was very much a draw for me in making this film, in that with colony collapse disorder, the bees abandoned the babies and the queen, and that's unnatural, right, for that to occur, and that it was a direct parallel to us symbolically abandoning Mother Earth. And so finding out that the bees are a female society, and so if you look at a hive of 50,000, 90% are female, and that they work together for the greater good. Now, if you look at the bee goddesses, like they had bee goddesses in Delphi, which I got to see firsthand when I was in Greece, went to Delphi. And there's also a shamanic group called the Path of Pollen that kind of explore the esoteric look at the bees. But more so, what appeals is that they work together for the greater good. And having had a near-death experience and almost dying, and really wanting to be in service and to do something that's bigger than me and bigger than our mortal petty concerns, that the bees have been such a symbol to emulate in so many ways, and that if we could work with hive mentality in this crazy cuckoo time that we're finding ourselves in, and also to the practice of putting your crap aside and being in service to the greater good. And I don't think a lot of times when it comes down to it that human beings do that necessarily. But it's nice notion to strive
so
for.
that's what you're championing now with your new project, Honey Colony, right?
Yes.
So that's kind of the evolution that's come out of Vanishing of the Bees for you, right? Because I don't know, I think of you as a queen bee, and I think it's beautiful that you're a real champion for them, and I look to you as, you know, the number one expert that I know to ask these questions to. And I love that it's evolved into Honey Colony, and you know, you're such a warrior out there to help you know, bring people together with this notion of working together as like a honeycomb colony, right?
Yes.
That's what you're promoting, and I think that's beautiful, and we need to be inspiring people any chance we get to be thinking along those lines, right? And inspiring people and educating people to move in that direction. So I really have a deep appreciation for the work that you're doing with that. So can you tell us a little bit more about Honey Colony?
Yes, Honey Colony is now, we're heading into our 5th year. And, you know, people are like, oh, are you working on anything else? Yeah, I've spent 12 hours a day on Honey Colony for the past 5 years. So,
I didn't realize it was 5 years.
Yeah,
okay.
It's been 5 years, which is, you know, the make it or break it time for a startup, because most fail, but mine won't.
So what is it exactly?
So Honey Colony is a magazine and a marketplace, and our mission, you know, our tagline is where the hive decides what's healthy. And it's really kind of emulating the bees in that we are sourcing the best, you know, the proverbial pollen and nectar in the form of stories and products that we can stand by. There's a hell of a lot of fluffy Cosmo BS writing out there, and a lot of disinformation. And so as a journalist, we pride ourselves our team to put forth very solid, well-cited content to empower people to be their own best health advocate, and at the same time also putting honesty back into the food supply and touching upon issues of sustainability and obviously the bees and so forth. So as we've evolved, because if you have a startup, you're in a constant state of beta and you have to be ready to pivot, as they say. We are now offering people, it turns out, CBD, which is a plant compound, and silver, and really catering to chronic illnesses, and also now creating something has to do with metabolomic medicine, which is looking at you personally and your deficiencies and how to address them to bring you back into balance and health.
Fantastic. Okay. That sounds like a really great project. So everything's online, right? So when you say a magazine, it's not printed, it's online,
yes,
right? But there's
yes.
many articles and
Yes.
and then you have products that you're championing as well that are being shown to be really helpful to people, and you're also doing health consultations for
Yes.
people, right?
Yes, I started doing health consultations because I found someone will say, I have candida or I have bladder cancer or whatever, right? And it's what am I going to tell you? Just put this in your cart and buy it. If you're taking CBD oil, but you're chowing down on fried chicken and gluten, who cares? And so I find over and over and over again that people do not acknowledge the importance and the impact of our diet. As you know, the consultations kind of came about because it's like, if I'm not a salesperson to just say put this in your cart and buy it. I really have to do an intake and see a condition. Let's say, for instance, chronic fatigue syndrome. It could be because you have leaky gut and you have a compromised digestion system, or it could be because you did come into contact with Epstein-Barr, or it could be because you took a lot of in other words, there's so many. We need to look at the individual, and so I'm down with personalized medicine and
Right.
basically being a coach, being an accountability partner, being someone who has a lot of resources to help put someone on their path toward health.
Right. And I love that, and that's so important. And it's like you said, there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to anybody's problem, and it's also, people get really hyped up about, around the hype of certain things, like everybody needs to eat kale or quinoa or whatever the hot thing is of the moment, right, or CBD or whatever. But there needs to be a holistic approach to wellness. So we're not, segmented, fractalated people, right? We're a holistic organism. So the approach to wellness has to be holistic. You have to look at the entire wheel of wellness and assess all parts of that wheel to determine what's the best approach to heal someone, right?
Absolutely. And I think more and more that doctors, Western medical doctors who are part of the matrix system, are not, for one, they're not educated in nutrition. How cuckoo is that?
Yeah, that is insane.
And they're not asking the right questions. They're not looking in the right places. And I could speak firsthand. It's taken me 6 years to start to reverse my autoimmune, and I have lab results to prove it. And that I want to empower people. And I also have seen that, for instance, reaching out to other, quote unquote chronic illness bloggers. Like I put forth an ebook that was meant to inspire others, put hope in someone's life that they can reverse their autoimmune. Well, when I went to share that to Facebook groups with chronic illness, whether it be fibromyalgia or lupus, people were defending their illness because they're invested in being victims and they're invested in being sick. And so there's no cure for fibromyalgia. No. And let's talk about this, that the beliefs that we carry are so
toxic. Yeah. And limiting.
And limiting. And it's basically, what you believe really will help dictate and paint the picture of your destiny.
Our thoughts create our reality, right? We create our own reality. I believe that as well.
Yes.
So it is sad that it's that some people are somewhat brainwashed by the system and by the doctors that they've been told to trust, right? So we're here, raising awareness about there is another path, there is another way, there is alternative medicine, there are alternative solutions, and you don't have to believe everything that you hear from your doctor. You can do your own research, and certainly with the internet now, it's becoming easier and easier for that information to get around and for people to get more information to heal themselves. There was one more question I wanted to ask you about the bees and the food supply. And I want to come back to your autoimmune. That was something I wanted to focus on. But before I forget, I just wanted to ask you this one question about the bees. And you're talking about putting honesty back into the food supply. And I know there's a statistic about the bees and how much of our food is actually dependent on the bees. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Do you mean the 2 in every 3 bites? 1 in 3?
Is that what it is? Yeah. Can we talk about that?
Well, I've seen it be 1 in every 3 bites, and then I've seen it actually be 2 in every 3 bites.
Okay, so 1 to 2 of every 3 bites that we eat is dependent
I would,
on the bees.
The research that it is
because it's essentially the produce, right?
Well, it's everything from avocados to zucchinis and nuts, and let's not forget the plants and the whether it's like echinacea or lavender, the herbs. So it's a whole, just basically like our life would not be very sweet, literally and metaphorically.
Because if the bees are dying, they're not here to pollinate the crops that we need to eat.
Yeah. So
right?
For instance, I had someone who's like, well, why don't you do a research project on the spiders? And it's like, well, we put a lot of attention to honeybees because I think they are most valuable to us. And so that's selfish in a way. We're not championing for a lesser, quote unquote, insect that's not as productive for us. So that's why, again, the bee is just an indicator species, just bringing light, because to me the fact that the sea urchins or the worms, I didn't even mention the earthworms, are dying is just as much as a travesty. Like the soil, it's just not enough to eat fruits and vegetables now. You have to not only make sure that you have to make sure it's organic, because or else the soil has been, the soil is so important and has been so compromised. Mm-hmm. And when you started this asking me questions like what's my beat, I started I was a freelance journalist and was writing for Penthouse. And I was exploring kind of the seedy side of LA, having come from Montreal. So I'm saying that because I never expected to be in health and wellness in
what shifted you in this direction?
My near-death experience.
Which was you getting hit by a car, right?
Yeah, in a crosswalk at 30 miles an hour. And just turning my life upside down.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I remember it was my 29th year, so it's pretty, in astrology they talk about your Saturn return. And I remember someone's like, oh, you're 29, you should get a reading. And I was like, to myself, even though I'm into astrology, was like, Saturn return, what is that? Like a B movie? What is that? But then finding out that basically my accident happened just kind of like exactly during my Saturn return, and that when I went to get an astrology reading after my accident, the person said they were looking at something called the Sabian symbols, which corresponds with the time of birth and certain symbols corresponding to degrees of planets. Anyway, so he said that the symbol was 2 things. One, a person sitting cross-legged with their body disintegrating, and I very much felt like my body was disintegrating at the time. And then also associated with the nurse, and he saw me helping others, and I was really like, what the F is this guy saying? Like, I'm a journalist. And so here, I am. I'm hoping that this year I can get my coaching in functional medicine to basically legitimize a little bit more what I'm already doing and further my knowledge. But it hasn't stopped since making the film. And yeah, so I think it's the accident that brought me down this healing pathway, because as a Canadian, they didn't even issue physiotherapy. And it's like I had a 14-inch metal rod in my leg that I could feel. And I also, it was a near-death experience, so I woke up with sensitivities that I didn't have before. Like I've developed supranasal powers.
Supranasal powers. You can smell
I have
things that other people can't smell.
Yeah.
This is one of your superpowers.
Yes. And I say like we're like the X-Men. Like it's a superpower. Instead of seeing it as a negative thing, the fact that I'm so sensitive, if people were to respect us and not think we're wackadoodles, that there's a lot to learn there.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Wow, so that's interesting, the near-death experience, changing the course of your life, altering the trajectory of your life. So something that was so traumatic, really, maybe in the long run, could be retrospectively looked at as a blessing, because it's a big turning point.
And that's a huge point that I actually want to touch upon. So thank you. That back to the notion of being victims, that it's really, it's not what happens to you, but it's what you do with what happens to you. And to look at and as a storyteller, I think it's just like looking for meaning, and also trusting that you can turn this to your benefit. So I see it as like, okay, I wasted a lot of years, a lot of money. Let me help you not go down this path. Right. Because what happens is that a lot of times they will go down the Western medicine path, and by the time they are open now to receiving alternative medicine, Western medicine has compounded their situation and made it worse. Mm-hmm. It's the whole thing of like, oh, you're taking this medication, well then take this medication to deal with the side effects of the first medication.
Right. So it's not really a solution. It's not really getting to the root. It's just Band-Aids. Right. Yeah. So and Band-Aids, I think, can serve their purpose as long as you notice that they're Band-Aids and you're looking for something else. Because a lot of times, like, people are really suffering and in pain, and they'll come and this one person has an issue with their liver, and they wanted a consult, and they had candida, and she was so scared because of prior experience that she was going to continue with the steroids that the doctor gave her for her liver, and then come back to me once she had the results, that things had stabilized. Even though she's taken steroids before, she knows that there's severe side effects, but nonetheless. So I believe like we can work with Band-Aids or with Western medicine, and because let's say a lot of times a person comes to you and there are all these medications, well, it's a step, right? You have to, let's deal with your gut first, for instance, and then we can reassess things. Right, step-by-step approach. So what I hear you saying is that people can benefit from the experience that you've had, and you can point them in the direction so that they can get the shortcut to the things that might be really more effective in the long term for them, and save them time from going down the wrong path. Yes, right. And the most important thing, I think, is critical thinking, to ask questions and to really question something, not just because your doctor gave it to you. Hello, there's Google today. What's your excuse? Look it up. Right. Be your own health advocate. Right. That's what you're trying to empower people to do. But I find even with the tools of the internet, I'll get questions of like, they could just put a Google search and look when they don't. Yeah, but people want to hear from an expert, because there's so much information on Google, I think, that it can be overwhelming, right? If you search one question, you can get hundreds of thousands of answers. How do you know which one to believe? And some can be conflicting information. So if they have someone like you to come to who has, a deeper and a wider and a more vast understanding of what's out there, you may be able to help them kind of pinpoint what might be true for them much more quickly than they could do on their own. Yes, I guess I'm saying that people don't even bother to go the extra step because they blindly just listen. We've been conditioned as a society to just ask the doctor, to go to the doctor and take whatever they offer, because they're the doctor, so they know, right? Like today I got a question, and when I say I'm getting a question, because I have the live chat up, so I'm working and then I have the live chat, and I have someone who's doing customer service. But now more and more I'm doing consults. So today, like, I had the
our customer service person ask me, do we have anything for Alzheimer's? This is such a hello. What?
Oh, sure. 1, 2, or 3. Go put
I
it
have
in
to
your
sit
car.
down
No,
with you.
this is a much deeper question.
How old are you? What stage of Alzheimer's? What's your diet? Have you been exposed to antibiotics? Do you have mercury in your mouth?
Yeah.
There's just this is
the answer is going to be yes, but I'm not sure what right thing that comes after that yes until I have more information, right?
And again, I just go back to the diet. I just think food, Hippocrates, food is thy medicine. He said that for a reason.
Right.
And more and more, I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I was watching a show on A&E called Live Free or Die. And it was very interesting because I was looking at 4 different characters that basically were living off the grid, and finding food was a big part of their life. So, of course, as you can imagine, many of them are adopting more of a hunter-gatherer. Nonetheless, I was watching this mainstream TV show, and the commercials, like Carl's Jr., McDonald's, Wendy's, they all had these $4, $5 specials. No greens, deep fried. Just, it's not food.
Right.
It's not food. It's
a
faux food
product. It's frankenfood.
It's frankenfood.
It's pink slime in the form of a hamburger patty, etc. Right, and worse. But yeah, I hear you, and that's why I do what I do, is because that is what is the standard American diet. And with this show, we have people listening from all over the world, so I'm really interested in getting the feedback from people about what their diets are like around the world. Our experience mostly, even though you're a traveler and I'm planning on doing some traveling myself to learn more about what's going on in the food and in the other parts of the world, but right now our point of reference is the United States. We've got the GMOs, we've got the pesticides, conventional agriculture is, enormous, organic agriculture is tiny. People are eating the standard American diet, and we're sicker than ever, right? So
guess what, Magda? The same scenario is now happening in places like Greece.
I would imagine so. I mean, all the fast food companies are popping up all over the world, and we're spreading our disease all over the world through the food.
Yeah,
right.
And through the illusion of Americana, American living, this has a slickness or an appeal to it when it's really smoke and mirrors.
Right.
So in Greece and Italy, the highest levels of obesity in children in Europe.
Oh, wow. That's shocking. Okay, good to know. I wanted to switch gears a little bit here and ask you about yoga. So I know that you're a yogi, and I'd love to know how yoga came into your life and how you find it benefits your life.
That's a nice question. Thank you, fellow yogi. I was living in 1996 in San Francisco, and had the opportunity to not have to drive everywhere, and actually started doing yoga there, and it was an intent for my new year at the time. So I want to say in 1998 I've been practicing since then.
So right away you took to it, you saw the benefit from the first class, and how did you make it to a first class?
I loved it from the get-go. Okay. I gravitated more. I don't gravitate towards Kundalini, sorry, not at all. I just don't. More into
there's different strokes for different folks.
I really liked Anusara, open heart yoga. I really liked flow. I also liked Ashtanga because, of course, in the beginning I was just learning the postures, the asanas, and then I had my accident and I didn't have physiotherapy. As a Canadian without insurance, if you can imagine that they didn't give me physiotherapy. And so I would literally walk into the studio. At that time now I was going to City Yoga in Larchmont, which is now I think something else. And so I was basically walking in with my crutch and using it to rehabilitate me.
So yoga is a self-healing tool for you to recover from that accident.
Yes.
Amazing.
And then my left side and my right side are so different, the female and the male. And so yoga has done... I just don't know how people live without yoga. I really don't.
I don't either. I always say I don't know where I'd be if yoga hadn't come into my life. So you find it to be an ongoing, valuable necessity, it sounds like, for you.
Yes, I didn't practice over the summer, for instance. So the thing is, like, I'm a very disciplined person, but I really need to go to a class. Like, I want to be in a class with the energy, and I did, and I was doing a little yoga at the ritual, every day when I exercise, but it wasn't the same, and my body paid for it. And I'm in the heat, which helps detox, which helps lubricate my joints, which helps me with flexibility and feels really good.
Hot yoga.
Yeah.
I mean, okay.
But not Bikram.
Okay, but you like the hot yoga
Yes.
for that whole detox aspect and warming the body up, and yeah.
I love it, and I'm a big yogi fan.
Right, beautiful. I know yoga is the answer to so many things, as I find. I wanted to go back a little bit to the autoimmune conversation. So I know that you have a lot of insight on autoimmune disorders. You have autoimmune disease yourself. What have you learned about autoimmune specifically? Like, are there common denominators with the different autoimmune diseases that you've become aware of with the work that you're doing? Or are there any treatments that maybe you're finding that are effective across the board? I just know so many people are suffering from a wide variety of autoimmune disorders right now. And you quoted a statistic about that. Can we dive into that?
Yeah, so there's about more so probably 80 million, because so many
Americans.
Okay. Yeah, this is in America.
Suffering from autoimmune disease?
Yes. Okay. There's 80 different types of autoimmune.
80?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I certainly don't know all of them. The idea is that the body is attacking itself. So when you say, like, now I could show my lab reports and I barely have an autoimmune condition based on the ANA, which is the anti-nuclear antibodies, which just shows whether the body is attacking itself or not. So I've concluded that it's basically Western medicine's way of saying we don't really know what's going on with you when they label you with, like, fibro or lupus. Because in my case, what had happened was the exposure to the chemicals coupled with a trauma that put my body in fight or flight. Like, after that accident, my body started just erupting in all different types of ways, because the body was stuck in fight or flight, and it never did. I mean, I did a lot of work on my own, but it gets stuck in your body. So then, I guess all to say that there's so many different reasons that can spur an autoimmune. Again, also in my case, growing up in the 70s, took a lot of antibiotics. Learning the effects of the antibiotics on the gut, like, can permanently change the gut biome, and the gut biome has an effect on our state of mind and our well-being and our immune system. So again, I say that I was like a perfect storm. So if someone comes to me and they have whatever autoimmune, I'll sit there and break it down. And what else I found, based on Anthony Williams' book Medical Medium, is that in a lot of cases it's the Epstein-Barr virus. So Epstein-Barr virus is a very, very common virus. 90% of the population have it. It's exchanged through kissing. It's what's typically associated with mononucleosis. However, it can go, you can have a mild sore throat and really have Epstein-Barr virus, and it goes misdiagnosed. So what I've seen in my informal poll of asking sufferers, a lot of times EBV is implicated, and so you can never cure yourself of EBV. You just have to, like, get the viral load down, but that seems to be a lot of times associated with an autoimmune, and the Western medicine won't look, or they don't know. And this thing is that this virus, like, once you start looking at viruses and let's say parasites, and this is really extraterrestrial genius organisms. The virus can hide in your organs and then make its way to another organ and stay basically idle or not active. And then if you have an accident or a trauma, and the trauma can be anything from, like, a miscarriage to a divorce, doesn't have to be as extreme as getting hit by a car. then a lot of times it will express itself, and it could appear as a thyroiditis, it can appear as lupus, so on.
So how can people, reduce their toxic load like you're talking about?
So I'm a big fan, as you know, of coffee enemas.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if I look at, it's been 6 years I've been trying to reverse the autoimmune. It's only in the past 6 that I managed to change those ANA numbers.
6 months?
6 months,
okay.
Yes. From my time being in Greece, that I made a mindful effort of I'm going to Greece, and when I come back, I'm not going to have this autoimmune condition. And that didn't happen exactly that way. But I think the coffee enemas have helped me get rid of a lot of the toxins. I'm also a big fan of glutathione, intravenous glutathione, master antioxidant. All of these are basically ways to support the liver, because what happens is people with autoimmune have a sluggish liver, and it all happens in the liver. So of course, taking herbs that help the liver, whether it's milk thistle or other herbs, it depends, what tradition, if you're following Ayurvedic or Western or Chinese or allopathic or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So diet, cutting out gluten. It's like I was having a conversation, who eats gluten anymore? Yeah, well, a lot of people still eat
in
gluten.
California, and in the healthy food bubble is different than the rest of the world, right? Okay, so those are some things that work for you for the autoimmune, doing the coffee enemas, and what else? I'd like to know, for a health warrior like yourself, what does your morning routine look like? What do you do on a daily basis to keep yourself healthy and to practice that prevention we talked about and to be balanced? And
well, I'm big into superfoods and micronutrients. Right now, I personally have been starting my day with bulletproof coffee, so I don't know if that's not necessarily for everyone, because actually if you have adrenal conditions, you have to be mindful. Coffee is definitely not for everybody, and honestly I don't even know if it's for me, but I really love it.
That's right now how you're starting your day. Okay.
So I just want to be honest with that. But however, if you are going to drink coffee, I'll say this, that I will not drink toxic coffee, because finding out that I've been exposed to mold. I've been hospitalized due to mold, so I have a sensitivity to it. And now looking back, I know I'm segueing, but when I was in Greece, I think I was in the summer in an environment with mold, and it has an impact on your hormones and everything, your well-being. You might not even know it. Okay, so what I was doing, starting my day with coffee that's organic, that I know doesn't have a lot of acidity, that I know that doesn't have mold, and pesticides. Because you don't think, I will not touch coffee now outside, because I know there's too many pesticides that go in on the beans. So
it is one of those heavy pesticide crops. I don't know that about coffee. Is that?
I mean, heavy pesticides crops. Now, yesterday I was editing a story on the Clean 15 by the Environmental Working Group, and there was the word only beside 7. This vegetable only has 7. Really? 7?
Only
now is
7
a good
pesticides
thing.
Is on the clean list?
Yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah. They're saying describing it as 7 is a good thing, as opposed to God knows how much. So
oh wow.
Yeah, they definitely use a lot of pesticides on coffee, fungicides and pesticides. So okay, I start with coffee. I'm now putting I was not doing any dairy, and I don't do dairy, but I'm making the exception, and I'm using raw organic grass-fed butter, and then MCT oil, and I'm putting it in the Vitamix, and it's very yummy.
What's the deal with MCT oil?
So it's a medium chain triglyceride, so it's great for helping with brain cognition and great for anti-inflammatory. And so it's basically a healthy oil, and making the most out of your oil. So I'll do that. I'll have my coffee on an empty stomach, and then I was during the summer created a Greek superfood version of my breakfast. So what I would do is get organic tahini. I would find organic tahini, take half of a avocado, a fig, bee pollen, spirulina, turmeric.
Wow.
and mix it all together, and oh my goodness, so yum.
Interesting
So
combination. I can't imagine what that would taste like.
Yummy.
Sounds like it has a lot of nutrition in it. That brings up a question actually about the bee pollen and honey as well. Obviously, they're not vegan products. Are those products? Do you view them as being harmful to the bees? I would imagine that if you're taking them, that you would think not, because you're such a champion and protector of the bees. So one,
I would say, I mean, obviously I've heard this point of then there are some vegans who do eat bee products. So I see it as medicine, and I want to have the bees' medicine. I feel like I carry the bee message and what they represent. So if I'm buying from, I know the beekeeper, and I'm buying I feel like as long as the beekeeper is mindful and not taking everything away from the bees, and that I'm using it with reverence, that for me, I've asked permission, and I feel okay with it. Everyone can decide on their own. I don't see it as an animal product.
Okay, so the most sustainable way to have bee pollen
is to have your own bees.
Okay, so if that's not practical for everyone listening, what's your recommendation for people who are concerned about the bees and want to have the benefits of their medicine? What's the most sustainable, non-harming way to
get to befriend the beekeeper, so because in any case, 1 grain of pollen has been found to have up to, I'm not going to say up to, at least 13 different chemicals. 1 little grain of pollen. So bees are like flying dust mops, and if you're questioning whether the honey or the pollen is tainted, you should be asking yourself. And bees can fly 5 to 9 miles, so securing a source of clean. And now the irony is that the urban, you can argue that the bees are in the urban settings are healthier than in the countryside and are safer. How cuckoo is that also?
That is counterintuitive for sure.
Yes.
So, but I'm just wondering, from a practical level, for people who can't really establish a relationship with the beekeeper, what's the next best thing? Do you have these products on your site that have been vetted, that people could get them from you? Because I'm just thinking about the people listening going,
I didn't even think
know any
of
beekeepers. Like, how am I want to have honey, I want to have bee pollen, I appreciate the medicinal benefits, and I want it to be sustainably sourced, but I don't necessarily have that connection. So for those people...
we represent a Seda, which is an African honey that supports a tribe in the Mole International Forest in Zimbabwe. And so if someone wants to have a local... Then we also carry Bloom, and we're in works now to private label a honey. But Bloom is also a reputable.
So obviously anything on your site is vetted by you, and
yes, we also have a royal jelly, which is controversial, and Sean has visited the farms and made sure that they're taking the royal jelly in an ethical manner.
Mm-hmm.
And in any case, let's talk about beekeeping. Beekeeping is about manipulating bees. So just so you know, like let's pretend that it's the summer when it's the winter, and then have them go into a honey flow. There's all a type. It's all a, even playing around with Mm-hmm. So if I have my bees, really, I just want them near me. It's not that I even want the honey. I just want them. Just want to support them.
Right. So if you want to be an ethical, conscious eater, and you want to have bee products as a part of your repertoire, then either you want to have a direct relationship with a beekeeper, or get your products from someone like you who has vetted the products. Right? Because I imagine that some of our listeners are ethical vegans who don't want to have any animal products, and that's fine. Everybody can do their own. But there are vegans as well, and I imagine that I'm hoping and trying to encourage people to be conscious about the food choices that they make. So those are some great advice and great tips for people who want to actually enjoy the medicine from the bees. So thank you for that. I want to ask you one more question, final question. And this is something that I'm going to be asking all my guests, and it's a two-part question. So the first part is, what is your personal wish for the world? As in, what do you want to see happen in the world? And secondly, how are you being involved in that solution, whatever that is that you want to see created in the world?
Wow, that's a big question. Give me a moment. What's my wish for the world, basically? I'm wishing that people can step into their purpose and also their realization of the infinite power of the human body. I'm also wishing for more kindness, but I honestly feel like people are need to wake up, and that they're being put to sleep with TV and sugar and shitty food. And for realsies, like IQ actually can go down from these things, and the chemicals, and to just, I feel like in my life, I've spent a big part of my life now deleting self-limiting programs and relearning things. And so just for people to really connect with their higher selves and really ask questions, their inner knowing. What's the second question?
And
how am I doing as well?
I guess through your work that we've already talked about,
and just holding myself accountable. There's not a lot of people who could say, yeah, I effed up, I'm sorry, and put their ego aside. And I'm trying. I'm not obviously perfect. And also incorporating, Marianne Williamson is a big part of my life, as I know that she is for you as well. And I tease now that I listen to her while I'm doing my coffee enemas every week, because it's my time and it's like ritual, and I'm just self-care, putting myself in the right frame of mind to take responsibility for my own shit instead of just projecting. There's so much projecting that's going on. So I just want to walk my talk. It's a daily practice.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Magda.
Yeah, I really appreciate the time with you and all the great work that you're doing for the world and raising awareness and doing your part to help wake people up. And, you are making your wish for the world come true every day by doing the work that you're doing. So thank you so much for being a part of awakening consciousness on the planet. You can find Maryam on Twitter at Maryam Henein. That's MaryamHenein, and at honeycolony.com. Thanks so much for answering the call to be here today. If you found the show in any way empowering or inspiring, I would be so grateful if you would write a review in iTunes. This is really the best way to help support the show and to help us get noticed by others who are looking for the kind of content that we're sharing. You can also support the show with a small monthly donation on Patreon. Go there and check out our perks at patreon.com/visionary lifestyle. Namaste.